Nancy's DNA, it makes it an especially compelling DNA sample, right? If they are mixed. And we see that a lot with suspects and victims, that there is mixed blood or mixed other type of biological material.
This isn't about counting the hours since Nancy Guthrie was snatched from her bedroom in the middle of the night. It's a numerical proportion, a specific genetic ratio currently being analyzed at a Florida facility. This substance was presumably discarded by the intruder who breached that entrance, forcibly removed an 84-year-old woman, and has evaded public identification for over 66 days. Both federal agents and the top authority in genealogical forensics possess that data. Her latest assessment of the situation was incredibly grim. Please stay tuned. You already grasp the basic framework of this tragedy. Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old whose daughter anchors the Today Show, was last spotted at her residence in Catalina Foothills around 9:45 p.m. on January 31st after a family meal. Someone dropped her off. She entered her home, and then she vanished. During the search, officers located bloodstains on the entrance porch that were linked to her. Investigators noticed the rear entrance was left ajar. Her heart monitor stopped communicating with its network at 2:28 a.m. on February 1st. Her security camera system shut down at 1:47. Very early that Sunday morning, at 1:47 a.m., the front porch camera goes dark. By 2:12 a.m., the tracking software recognizes a human presence on the feed. Forensic teams discovered biological residue inside the residence that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't the blood found on the porch belonging to the victim. It was an internal finding, a collection of genetic data from a complete stranger. This specific DNA didn't correspond with anyone in Nancy Guthrie's immediate social circle. No relatives, no household employees, and no one with a legitimate reason to leave their genetic mark in that house. The sheriff, Chris Nanos, verified this on February 19th. Earlier this week, Chris Nanos confirmed that the team is looking into investigative genealogy to track down potential relatives linked to the Guthrie abduction. Once that update hit the scientific community, the reaction was instantaneous and unanimous. Professional researchers in the field all expressed the same sentiment. If the kidnapper's genetic code is available, this mystery can be solved. Not years from now, but very shortly. The required databases exist. The science is sound. This strategy has succeeded in countless previous investigations. If they process the data quickly, a name will surface. CeCe Moore serves as the lead expert at Parabon Nanolabs. She has personally cracked over 300 unsolved cases by utilizing only DNA samples and public family history records. She spoke out early on, before the full extent of the difficulties became clear. If I were the perpetrator, I would be terrified right now, because forensic genealogy is going to unmask him. She noted that if the individual has deep American roots and a long-standing family history in this country, pinpointing them could take just a few minutes or hours. She mentioned she had been eagerly anticipating this type of forensic breakthrough in the Guthrie search. That was back in February. By February 20th, her perspective shifted. Nanos spoke to the press again and used a term that completely redirected the forensic path of the case. He mentioned the DNA was mixed. We've recovered genetic material from the premises that consists of multiple profiles. Consequently, we must isolate them. We're hoping the technicians can achieve this while keeping enough samples for the defense's future review. The biological evidence collected from Nancy's residence wasn't a singular, distinct profile. It was a combination of traces. Genetic signatures from various individuals were tangled together in one sample, turning a possible lead into what Nanos eventually described as a biological riddle that might take months to solve. When the forensic world heard that, they had one pressing concern. How messy is this genetic combination? The clarification, once it finally arrived, was far more impactful than any previous public statement regarding the search. CeCe Moore publicly stated that she wasn't initially worried when she heard the Guthrie evidence was blended. Cross-contaminated DNA is a regular occurrence at scenes of violent crimes. Any area where a physical altercation took place will almost certainly have traces from more than one person. For a genealogist, the simple existence of a mix isn't the problem. The issue is the specific structure of that mix. A sample with two people where the suspect's contribution is small and the victim's is large is a hurdle we know how to clear. Laboratories have protocols for this. Computational experts can navigate those challenges. It might be a slower process, but it eventually yields results. Moore explained that a combined sample can actually be helpful. An obvious minor contributor, someone whose DNA is present without a valid reason, really pops out against the victim's genetic profile. It can act like a beacon pointing straight at the killer. However, she described this as a complex blend, meaning there are at least two unknown people involved. It isn't just Nancy and one stranger. There are multiple unidentified contributors in that mix. As the weeks turned into a month, the private lab in Florida, DNA Labs International, which Nanos picked over the FBI's Quantico facility, was still analyzing the sample, but no profile or genealogical lead had materialized for the detectives. Moore watched the delays and grew suspicious of the quiet. She had seen complicated mixtures untangled in days. She has seen facilities generate solid leads from messy samples in under a week. This investigation was not following any typical forensic timeline. When Nanos suggested it might take a full year for results, Moore interpreted his words differently. She believed he was implying they were waiting for future technological breakthroughs. That suggests to me that current software and computational methods aren't sufficient for the specific genetic obstacles the investigators are dealing with. To grasp the gravity of what these detectives are up against, you have to understand exactly how forensic genealogy functions. It is not the same as CODIS. CODIS refers to the FBI's National DNA Database, which stores profiles from convicted criminals and certain arrestees. It contains nearly 20 million entries. You upload an unidentified sample, and you either get a direct hit or you get nothing. The Guthrie evidence has already been checked against that system. The search came up empty. Whoever left their biological signature in that house does not have a criminal record that would put them in the federal database. Standard police databases aren't going to crack this mystery. Genetic genealogy operates on a totally different set of rules and requires a specialized kind of DNA map. Rather than checking traditional criminal databases, these experts develop an SNP profile, which stands for a single nucleotide polymorphism report. Look at it like this. If a basic CODIS profile is like a blurry photo of a face, just enough to verify someone you've caught, then an SNP profile is a comprehensive map of their entire family tree. It reveals more than just the individual. It traces their ancestors and consequently identifies their living family members. This matches the data provided by standard commercial heritage kits. These are the same tests that millions of folks across the country use to track down relatives, map out their lineage, explore their roots, or just learn the truth about their ancestors. After generating that specific report for the unidentified individual, they share it on open-source family tree sites. These aren't police systems. They're civilian websites where users freely upload their genetic info and opt into sharing it for research. This tech isn't hunting for the killer directly. It scouts out individuals who possess matching genetic codes, cousins of all types, or far-off kin, linked by a set of great-great-grandparents. Every person in the system with sufficient genomic overlap to suggest a shared forefather in their lineage. Using these leads, researchers construct a family diagram, step by step, relative by relative. Detectives chart each hit to established kin, following those trails through old archives until they discover where every independent line finally meets. These paths land on one specific figure, a man or woman of fitting age, location, and history to realistically be the perpetrator seen on that surveillance footage wearing a mask. C.C. Moore told the news that this process reconstructs a person's life through lineage using only genetics. Experts essentially deconstruct the fugitive's heritage bit by bit using their biological connection to others. So, one forebear at a time, we assemble his entire heritage. While the subject's name is a mystery, we can definitely pinpoint the various people who possess his genes. That is the secret. The culprit never actually provides his samples. Success only requires that a few far-off kin uploaded their own profiles. This method unmasked Joseph James D'Angelo, the infamous predator who outran the police for more than 40 years. This tactic pointed authorities toward Brian Kohberger for the Idaho slayings, tracking a heritage path beginning with a kit from some far-removed cousin. This strategy is established, legally sound, and getting much faster when all the right elements fall into place. However, it requires a solid genetic blueprint to start. You cannot use a messy blend or unusable background noise. You won't find a relative if the genetic signature is buried under layers of material from multiple different people. Initially, technicians must perform deconvolution, using complex math and algorithms to untangle a blended sample into separate, purified genomic records. This procedure must be effective, yielding a sufficient quantity of biological indicators to generate significant ancestral links within the various available digital repositories. If the separation fails, the whole process stalls. There is no data to upload and no family tree can be built. The suspect remains anonymous. Furthermore, the issue of data access is frequently overlooked by the major news networks. Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, along with MyHeritage, represent the premier global consumer genomics firms, collectively managing over 50 million unique subscriber accounts. Furthermore, every one of these firms has strictly prohibited police from accessing their archives, having decided that protecting customer privacy against criminal probes is a vital ethical and corporate duty. Moore explained to CNN that even with legal warrants, police would face a massive battle to get inside those databases. These companies have the legal firepower and intent to protect privacy, making forced entry incredibly slow and difficult. Only a few sites like Family Tree DNA, GED Match, and Moore's DNA Justice are accessible to cops, totaling under 2 million records. 50 million compared to 2 million. That is the massive gap detectives face every single day. Most of the private genetic info that might pinpoint a killer is locked away in vaults where police have no legal access. The tiny slice they can actually browse just is not enough for this method to function accurately for everyone in society. Consider another factor as well. Inside that small pool of 2 million users, the data is heavily skewed. White families with deep roots in America are way more likely to be in there than any recent arrivals. Individuals from Latin America, Africa, or Southeast Asia, or those who just skip the DNA kits entirely, are usually absent from these sites, along with their kin. Because of this, two critical factors decide if the process works. Success depends on generating a pristine genetic blueprint and checking if any relatives are among the 2 million users who opened their records to law enforcement. If both those stars do not align, this whole forensic genealogy path leads to a complete dead end. As a top-tier DNA expert, Colleen Fitzpatrick gave an interview to NBC shortly after NY vanished, but she wasn't leaking any confidential police details. She didn't reveal secrets shared by detectives behind closed doors. She simply used her scientific mind to explain a messy case to everyday people. Ancestry tracking handles tiny or ruined samples well, but struggles with blended data. The killer needs to be the main source, and his presence must be obvious. A 90 to 10% split sounds manageable, provided the suspect's biological material is actually present in that sample. The possibility is there. Fitzpatrick admitted that experts have previously cracked cases involving a 90-10 split when working with a clean sample from two people. Basically, any genetic material found will be a blend heavily favored by Guthrie, creating a massive hurdle for detectives trying to isolate signatures via standard ancestral forensic protocols. While software can handle some simple blends, she raised a critical point that changes the entire outlook of the case. Is that tiny 10% enough, in both amount and quality, to actually build a usable genetic profile? Can we actually find it? And more importantly, can we gather a precise enough sample to upload to a database and get results that a pro can actually work with? That is the billion-dollar question. And Fitzpatrick was blunt. 10% might simply not be enough to cut it. The indicators might be there, but they're too scarce. The signal may exist, yet be too faint and fragmented to use. Without a full set of markers, the profile remains incomplete. No profile means no searching the databases, which means no family tree can ever be constructed. Without a pedigree, an identity doesn't exist. She then brought up the second variable, which shifts the situation from a tough hurdle into a total scientific dead end. What if more than two people are in that mix? The sheriff used the plural DNAs, which suggests a more complex blend. Sometimes, biological evidence is tangled. We have a scene with multiple sources that we need to pull apart. Hopefully the lab pulls it off while saving enough for the defense to do their own testing. In forensics, that specific phrasing carries weight. It doesn't strictly mean two separate sources. A crime scene in someone's home could contain DNA from anyone who visited over the span of several years. Imagine a spot where many people have passed through over time. Their genetic footprints often end up clumping together on one common area. Decoding these blended samples relies heavily on calculated statistical patterns. Whenever a specimen holds DNA from two people and their concentrations are distinct, software can link every genetic trait to the likely source with enough certainty to build a usable result. Scientists pick out the primary donor first. Then, they grab the smaller traces from whatever mathematical leftovers remain. If you toss in a third mystery person, the whole math problem gets way more complicated. Every marker now has to be split across 3 different sets of odds at once. The margin for error grows much wider. Mistakes on individual data points happen far more often. The computer has to grind much harder just to hit the accuracy bars needed for family tree searches or future legal trials. Adding a 4th person does not just double the work. The difficulty of the problem spikes at an incredible rate. Every new donor adds tons of possible genetic combinations that the system eventually has to untangle and resolve. This specific detail is what really trips up the Guthrie probe. The sheer processing power required exceeds what modern programs can reliably handle right now. It isn't about lacking gear, cash, or expert minds on the job. Instead, we have hit a hard wall regarding what existing code can actually calculate from such specimens. Throughout February and March, C.C. Moore backed up how bad this mixture problem really is during several public talks. Her official designation for the evidence was a convoluted blend. We are talking about multiple unidentified profiles here. This isn't just a basic, clear-cut combination of the victim's markers and one mystery guy. She mentioned that once the wait time far exceeded her typical experiences, with messy samples surpassing the window where she normally sees results from even tricky 2-person sets, a new realization finally started to dawn. Whatever tools those data experts are using right now simply cannot crack this specific sample. Consequently, there is optimism for a breakthrough in the near future. During an episode of the News Nation Truth of the Matter show, host Natasha Zveivs put her on the spot. So, you are saying it is likely that the necessary software just does not exist yet? That it simply is not out there? Moore didn't mince words, did she? Neither the FBI nor private labs have the necessary tools yet. She tied this roadblock back to how forensic science has evolved over time. Sorting out old-school DNA profiles, like the ones in national databases, has been a 30-year project. Existing programs are quite advanced, easily accessible, and legally proven. Experts have spent 30 years honing these specific utilities through countless criminal cases and intense university studies. Using genetic markers for family tree investigations is a whole different beast and much newer. That digital workflow required to untangle a messy specimen into a distinct profile for family tree searching simply does not exist yet, according to Moore's professional assessment. Basically back at square one, because it is so fresh compared to the DNA methods they have used for years. The Guthrie probe is stuck right in that massive chasm between reliable legacy separation tools and the unpolished state of modern genetic identification tech. Moore did say things are improving. She noted massive progress over her 7.5 years in this line of work. She admitted that some developer somewhere might already be creating the fix for this exact mixture. Her exact words were, "I am not saying there isn't someone out there building a solution that actually works. Ideally, this breakthrough will spark further ingenuity and offer emerging researchers a chance to unveil the specialized projects they have been developing." All the spotlight on the Guthrie investigation might actually be what finally triggers those long overdue technological leaps in criminalistics. High-stakes mysteries often push the envelope. Specifically, solving the Golden State Killer crimes fast-track genetic sleuthing for police nationwide. This probe could potentially fast-track the creation of complex mixture sorting programs, though such tools remain a distant prospect. Right now, the physical evidence sits in Florida, and no genetic map has been created. But one specific administrative fact about this material still warrants mention. Nanos decided to ship the DNA to a private Florida lab instead of letting the FBI handle it at their main facility. Ex-Surgeon General Richard Carmona openly called the Quantico lab the nation's premier crime center, noting its services are basically public-funded and free for users. Meanwhile, C.C. Moore offered a considerably more cautious take on that assessment. According to her, DNA Labs International possesses unique genetic mapping tools missing from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's own facilities, a move intended to streamline the process by running multiple forensic tests at the exact same time. It remains to be seen if opting for that path was actually the correct decision. There is no doubt about the current location of the evidence, or its lack of progress over 66 days. While we are sharing this figure, the background details are crucial, since a lone digit is merely data without the story behind it. When viewed through the proper lens, that figure represents a definitive expert judgment on the case's most vital lead. Expert Colleen Fitzpatrick broke down these complex mathematical truths for NBC News. Imagine the sample found in the victim's residence splits 90% to 10% against a stranger. That ratio indicates that nearly all the biological matter comes from the person who resided there for many years. And that small 10% belongs to the masked intruder who kidnapped her and still has no name. Fitzpatrick mentioned, those proportions probably won't cut it. Lab technicians likely can't pull enough genetic data from a 10% sample to reach the required standards for tracing ancestry. She also brought up a major concern. Having a handful of people involved instead of just two makes the math so messy that modern computer programs just can't untangle the results. Cece Moore validated how difficult this was, labeling it a tangled genetic mess. To her, the 1-year delay proved that their existing tools were completely outmatched by this specific puzzle. Finally, she dropped the exact bombshell that every single person working the case was absolutely dreading. When the family trees I am tracing led right back to the neighborhood, it actually makes things tougher, don't you think? There are simply too many relatives living right there. That is a massive hurdle, not just a matter of time. This is tough, but the science will eventually catch up. Seriously, the team is making headway and a suspect sketch is finally forming. It is quite unlikely this proof will ever crack the mystery. That insight comes from a pro who has solved over 300 cases. Consider the specialist who felt immense hope this past February, the moment she learned world-renowned forensic genealogists discovered unidentified DNA within that residence. Leading the genetic team at Parabon Nanolabs, she pioneered this entire field, applying her expertise to resolve the most complicated cold cases across the country. She speaks with that distinct precision found only in genuine scientific experts, focusing strictly on the hard data rather than media sensationalism. Claiming it likely won't be the key evidence is a heavy statement. This isn't just some talking head. This isn't some television legal pundit sharing a casual opinion. This expert is uniquely qualified to judge if a specific forensic sample is actually testable. She stated quite clearly that if current findings are accurate, the genetic material from that house may have already hit the ceiling of modern science. That technical barrier likely won't shift in any time frame that benefits Nancy Guthrie. To be perfectly clear, this doesn't mean the investigation is over or that federal agents have run out of leads. It doesn't imply that the intruder will escape justice or avoid answering for what he did to an 84-year-old woman in the dark. The situation is grave. The primary forensic lead, the genetic material from the victim's home, is what everything has been counting on. The material the sheriff discussed in February might simply be beyond the current reach of what forensic labs can process. Right after she admitted the issues with the current sample, Cece Moore made a point that totally shifted the investigation's focus. After explaining how a small trace in a messy DNA blend can be impossible to read, she changed her approach entirely. She pointed out that she had to be taken to a new spot, and any secondary location offers a fresh chance for evidence. This wasn't some empty comfort or a vague hope meant to soften the blow of a failing investigation. A forensic expert is outlining a legitimate, data-driven backup plan that actually works. A new site wouldn't have the lopsided ratios or data tangles that are currently holding the forensic team back. Wherever she ended up after being taken from her Catalina Foothills home, be it a car or a hidden location, that's where the evidence is. A car, a house, a street, or any area where she was held or moved likely holds the perpetrator's biological traces. These spots aren't overwhelmed by 60 years of Nancy's own cells. That is the core issue with the home evidence. The forensic reality here is simple. Her DNA is all over that house because it was her home for decades. Every single surface carries her traces from years of daily living. Whether it was blood from a tiny scrape, a single strand of hair left on a pillowcase, a mug she handled, or a wall she once touched, her genetic identity is so deeply embedded into that home that any outside person's DNA is trying to be found through the thickest possible biological fog. Whoever was not supposed to be in that house is essentially trying to be detected against the most intense biological background possible from the victim's own decades of living. The intruder was only inside for 40 minutes, whereas Nancy lived there for years. A new location flips that math entirely. A car the suspect used would be covered in his own genetic markers. A room where he stayed would mostly have his traces. In a secondary location, a suspect's biological markers wouldn't be buried under 60 years of the victim's daily life. Fresh surfaces change everything for the lab. Moore mentioned this point plainly during her recent podcast appearance. If they can pull a clean profile from the abductor, genealogy will pin him down. I truly believe a lead will surface that way. She noted there is probably a second or third location. Nancy had to be moved and kept somewhere. Every path taken, and every place the suspects stopped, is a chance to find material that bypasses the current lab issues. Moore offered another suggestion that the detectives may have overlooked or not fully finished yet. She advocated for a second round of swabbing at the residence, even though the family has moved back in and others have been through. According to her, genetic material possesses remarkable durability, clinging to physical areas far longer than the public realizes, and even microscopic strands lacking roots can suffice for contemporary forensic investigations. She drew attention toward a singular element found within the entryway surveillance recording. The prowler apparently used a tactical bite light while moving through the house. Moore estimates he was inside for about 40 minutes. I doubt he kept that light in his teeth for the full duration. He likely pulled it out, instantly getting his genetic material all over the exterior of those gloves. He had to have touched something. Mouth DNA is one of the best ways to get a clear, reliable profile for the lab. If he took that light out or even just breathed without a mask, he dropped clues. Residual physical evidence likely remains throughout the residence after being bypassed during the preliminary sweep, awaiting discovery by agents who now hold a surgical focus and understand precisely where earlier technical protocols once faltered. Moore specifically highlighted the fact that these biological markers remain surprisingly tough. I'm convinced his DNA is still in that house somewhere. They should go back because it's easy to filter out the family's profiles. That advice brings up the political mess that has clouded this entire search from the very beginning. Ex-United States Health Chief and past regional top cop Richard Carmona chastised Chris Nanos for a catastrophic oversight after he personally authorized access to the forensic site before the primary investigator finalized the recovery of proof. It baffled everyone when the news reported that he just opened the house back up. That isn't a call for a sheriff to make. Usually, the lead investigator decides when the evidence is fully processed. Carmona told this to the media, but Nanos stood his ground, saying he stands by every choice his team made. He flatly denied that the crime scene was ever tainted, dismissing any pushback on his performance as totally absurd. A total consensus was reached by the Pima County Board of Supervisors to force Nanos to testify about his professional background and agency oversight. The local deputies union issued a unanimous vote of no confidence against their own boss on March 24th, while a recall campaign continues to pick up steam. Insiders with direct knowledge confirmed to Fox News Digital and News Nation that the sergeant running the Guthrie murder investigation had zero background in actual homicide cases before taking command of that specific division. This person was leading the group without ever having closed a single case of this nature. Only a single detective on that first squad had over 3 years of major crimes experience, though Nanos defended his staff by pointing to their track records. These reports from 2 different media outlets are now a permanent part of the public record regarding the early missteps in this probe. These are hard facts. Such findings do not conclude what happened to Nancy Guthrie specifically, or point fingers for any one particular error. They simply provide a verified account of the internal friction and external oversight currently surrounding the very department tasked with bringing her home. This matters for the forensic side because it sets the stage for how we judge every choice made regarding lab work and evidence handling. It is April 7th, 2026. 66 days have passed. Savannah Guthrie was back on air yesterday, dressed in yellow, covering world news. Headlines focused on a potential peace deal. On April 6th, she returned home to Rockefeller Center, visibly emotional as she met with well-wishers. Her mother remains missing while the search continues. Although they scaled back from the 400 agents initially involved, the Pima County Sheriff's Department shifted to a concentrated strategy where a dedicated, long-term squad handles every incoming lead that surfaces during this active stage of the probe. The feds are still on the case, and they've vowed to keep going until she is found or every single lead is exhausted. That glove discovered 2 miles from her residence seemed like a match for the suspect's doorbell video, but police eventually linked it to a local restaurant worker. This individual is employed in the vicinity and has been cleared of any involvement in the ongoing criminal matter. The complex DNA mixture remains at a specialized Florida laboratory, while several new ransom demands have surfaced lately. Messages sent to TMZ claimed Nancy was seen in Sonora, Mexico, with one note insisting the writer knew exactly who the kidnappers were. Time is running out as of Tuesday since the genetic separation failed, and a usable profile has not been generated yet. The trail has not hit the genealogy sites yet, and the intruder's identity remains a mystery, though scientific options have not been totally exhausted. Moore emphasized that a secondary scene might hold the key, providing the pristine biological samples that the current evidence lacks. Performing a fresh round of swabbing as recommended could reveal traces that the first team completely overlooked. Software that does not even exist right now might be available in a year to finally make sense of those difficult home samples. Genetic databases could grow if more people follow Moore's advice to upload their raw ancestry files to public sites. Just one upload from a distant cousin of the perpetrator could be the breakthrough this investigation desperately needs, alongside the human tips they rely on. Someone out there knows the truth because this suspect did not just appear out of nowhere and vanish into thin air. The suspect clearly scoped out her house and routine before acting. He gathered specific gear, including a distinct holster, an Ozark trail pack, and a tactical light. He spent 40 minutes in a ski mask. You don't prepare that well without leaving a trail. Somebody noticed a detail. Somebody provided the gear. Somebody listened to him talk. Reach out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's hotline immediately. Contact 1-800-CALL-FBI or visit their website, where a $12,000 reward is being offered for information. A Milwaukee law firm is putting up an extra $100,000 for an anonymous tip that breaks the case wide open. The timeline is not the only figure that carries weight in this complex forensic mystery. We also have to consider the folks staying silent despite what they know. Think of all the untouched DNA sites in that residence, the crime scenes yet to be found, and the genetic matches waiting in digital archives to pinpoint the perpetrator's relatives. If enough people share their data, a breakthrough is possible the moment the right intel reaches the right detective. The original DNA might still provide a lead if technology improves or the software gets an update, but maybe it won't. A top-tier specialist admitted that modern science might not be enough for this particular piece of DNA to solve the mystery on its own. However, this is far from the final chapter, as the police have plenty of other material to sort through. One path has ended, but the science continues alongside the family and the investigators who refuse to stop looking for her. This includes the reporters and scientists across the country who are still following every development in this tragic disappearance. If you have any tips regarding Nancy Guthrie, call 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can stay totally anonymous. Remember, she is someone's mother. She is a grandmother and a dear friend to many, serving as the sole reason everyone continues to search day after day. This report uses verified records and public statements. Every statistic and expert opinion here comes from a confirmed, on-the-record source. Everyone mentioned here is considered innocent until proven guilty in court, and this program is strictly for informational use. If you know anything about where Nancy Guthrie might be, please reach out to the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or visit their website. What this case truly reveals is not just the limits of modern forensic science, but the depth of human responsibility, patience, and collective awareness in the face of tragedy. At first glance, the story seems to revolve around DNA, the most powerful tool in modern criminal investigations. We've grown accustomed to believing that science can solve anything, that every mystery has an answer waiting to be extracted from a lab. But here, we are confronted with a sobering truth. Even the most advanced technology has boundaries. When evidence is too fragmented, too diluted, or too complex, even the best minds and machines can be left searching in the dark. And that's where the deeper lesson begins. This case reminds us that justice does not rely on science alone. It depends on people, on awareness, on memory, on courage. Somewhere, someone saw something. Someone noticed a detail that felt out of place. Someone heard a conversation, observed a behavior, or encountered a moment that didn't quite make sense. These fragments, just like DNA, may seem insignificant on their own, but when brought together, they can form a truth powerful enough to change everything. There is also a lesson here about time. We often expect immediate answers, quick resolutions, and clear conclusions, but real life doesn't follow that script. Justice can be slow, pain can linger. Families are left waiting, hoping, holding on to even the smallest possibility of closure. And yet, Despite the passing days, weeks, and months, the search continues. That persistence is a testament to human resilience, the refusal to give up, even when the path forward is uncertain. Equally important is the reminder of how fragile safety truly is. This was not a random location or a distant place, it was someone's home. A space filled with years of memories, routines, and comfort. And yet, even there, something unthinkable happened. It challenges us to stay aware, to protect one another, and to never assume that tragedy is something that only happens to other people. Finally, this story underscores the importance of community. Law enforcement, scientists, journalists, and ordinary citizens all play a role. A single tip, a shared piece of information, or even the decision to upload DNA data to a public database can become the turning point in an investigation. Justice is not built in isolation, it is built collectively. In the end, while science may be struggling to catch up, humanity still holds the key. Truth leaves traces in data, in memory, in human connection. And as long as people are willing to speak, to act, and to care, there is always hope that even the most complex mystery will one day be solved.